Welcome. We're glad you're here. My name is Eric White. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at the library. As you may know, our January theme is Colorado 150, Exploring Our Legacy, commemorating the sesquicentennial of Colorado. Throughout this month, we're holding talks, discussions, and events related to the history of this land. In that vein, we are excited to have Fred Mosqueda here to talk about Arapaho history and culture. Before we do formal introductions, I will just share my usual disclaimer that I give for every talk. The library sees part of its job as bringing in speakers to share their own perspectives for the enrichment of our community. Speakers' perspectives are purely their own. Okay, now I'd like to introduce our guest. Fred Mosqueda is a Southern Arapaho tribal historian and elder, and an Arapaho outreach specialist for the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma. He also represents the Southern Arapaho as their Sand Creek Massacre slash NAGPRA representative. As an Arapaho speaker, he works to support his community in preserving their culture, language, and traditional practices and ceremonies. This work, along with his role as an educator, has brought him to Estes Park in the past, where he has partnered with local organizations. Please welcome Fred Mosqueda.
Hey, ah,
Fred, we're so glad to have you.
thank you. Hey, het kaina he nini tana ni shini. And what I said was, hello, people of where it goes around. That's the name that we gave to Estes Park. So I called you the goes around in a circles people. And I said that it's been a good day today. So I'm just so glad to be here. And I wanted to talk to you about today about the Arapaho people, and how we started, how we ended up where we're at, and go through the history and some stories with you. In the beginning, there was nothing but water. Then our Father, He created all the animals that lived on the water, under the water, all the birds that lived on the water. He created all these. And then He created the first Arapaho, and He put him on a pipe. And he was floating on this water. And as he floated, he began to cry, began to pray loud, cry out in anguish. So all the birds and the animals were listening, and they said, "What's wrong with him? What is he doing?" And then they said, "Well, let's go ask him." So they went over there, and they asked this man, floating on this pipe, what is wrong? Why are you crying? And he said, "I have no place to place my pipe." And they said, "Well, what can you do?" He said, "Well, I need earth. I need dirt." And he said, "Well," they said, "Well, we want to help, but where is it?" And he said, "It's under the water, the bottom of the water. That's where this earth is." So they wanted to help. So all the animals. Now I'm going to tell this story in about 10 minutes, but it takes, in real life, it takes 4 days to tell this story. And where this story is told, I'm going to tell you later on, but let me tell this story real fast. So all the animals decided we want to help. So they all lined up and they went over to the man. They said, let me try. Let me try to get some dirt. So like the kingfisher, he said, I dive in the water. Let me try it. And so he dove in the water. He was gone a little while and he came back up, sputtering and everything. I couldn't go down. He said it was too deep. And then like the otter came. Let me try it. I dive. The otter dove, came back up. He said, "Oh, I can't make it. It's too far down there." All the animals, one by one, came and tried. Couldn't do it. Finally, there was this red-eyed duck, and he came in and he said, "Let me try it." Those last two animals. This turtle was trying to get in there, but kept pushing him back. So this duck, he dove down. He was gone a long time. And then pretty soon the water began to bubble. And this duck come up and he had a little bit of dirt in his beak, his bill. So that man took that mud and he put it on that pipe to dry. And he said, "That's all I could find, but it's down there. All this time, turtle's coming." This turtle said, "Let me try it." Everybody was looking at him like, it's just a turtle, slow, everything. He said, "Let me try. I'll try to go." Last animal, so he dove. He was gone a long, long time. He was gone so long, the animals began to say, he didn't make it. He probably drowned. It's not coming back. After a long period of time, the water began to bubble. And this turtle came out, and he had mud stuck under his arms, in his cavity of his legs, underneath his neck. In his shell, he had dirt there. He came up. That man took that dirt out of the first cavity and he threw it in that direction. Then he threw the other in that direction. That direction. This camera's showing me backwards, but anyway, he threw it to the southeast first, southwest, then to the northwest, northeast. Last one he laid to the east, laid it down. And everywhere that he threw this dirt, earth became there. All the animals were happy. They were clapping. They were saying, we did good. There's ground. There's earth. He has a place to put his pipe. It's great. Everything's good. And the man said, "No, it's not big enough." And about that time, Nayachet showed up. Nayachet is a tornado. And it's this woman on a black horse. She's got long black hair. Horse has long tail and long mane. And as she travels, this wind travels with her. So she started from where she was at. And by the time she went around the world, she had blown the dirt out to make the world the size that it is today. Now, this is a quick story of this, of how we were created, this Arapaho. After the earth was created, this first Arapaho, he came and he talked to our father and he told him how to get this red paint. And we were created from that red dirt, and he made us in the image that we were. So that's how the Rapos came to start out. And when they got done with that, the thing is that this pipe that this man was floating on, the Rapos still have it, and it's kept on the Wind River Reservation with the Northern Rapos. Within that package where they wrapped that old man pipe in there, Saicha, this pipe. And in there with him wrapped is a duck, that same duck and that same turtle are in there with him. And they're so old, they're petrified, So our creation, we still have that our Father gave us to make us Rapos, So that's how we were created, how we come. Now, I've looked, you can read these books and all these different people. They'll tell, well, you guys were in Minnesota. You guys were there at the Great Lakes. And they kind of equate it because that's the path that the Cheyennes came. So they always kind of still equate us with them because they came from there and they have stories and they have, they're historically documented of coming that way to the Red River and then came across into the Black Hills. Well, Arapaho's, some people say that. Then there was others that, like couldn't find no trace. What was his name? He was a soldier scholar. His name was Hugh Scott. And he looked, but he could find no evidence of us ever being east of the Missouri River. But the Rapos, the old people, used to always say, we come from the north. And there's a story that goes that as we was traveling, we was coming and we came to this large, huge expansion of ice. And on that ice, we started to cross. And they said half of us got across. And then there was a horn sticking out of that ice. And this little girl or this little boy told his grandmother, I want that horn. Cut that horn for me. I'm gonna make a top. So old lady took her knife and she cut that horn. When she cut that horn, it began to bleed. As it bled, it began to melt that ice. So half of us came across, and the other half stayed back. And I've heard it said that in Canada, there's a tribe that speaks a dialect similar to the Rapos. So we came on, the ones that came on, that came across. And as they were coming across the expansion of ice, there was a huge blizzard came. And that blizzard was a total whiteout. And when it passed, all the Rapos looked around and all they could see was ice. This big old patch. Nothing, nothing to show them which way to go. And so they were lost. They didn't know which way to go. So they did what they always done when they have trouble, when they're in having trouble something or anything. There was 7 old men sat down, 7 old ladies sat down. These are the advisors of the tribe. And they began to pray. And they prayed, our Father, help us, lead us, show us something. Which way to go? Where do we go to get off this ice to land? And as they were praying, they heard this sound. And they looked up, and there above them, flying in a circle, was sandhill cranes. And they looked up, and them old men said, they will know where land is. So the Rapos got up, and they followed those sandhill cranes into the land where we're at now. So that story is still used, and it's part of our I'll say in our Sundance Lodge, that story, and we use it when we get Earth because it led us into this land where we're at now. So when we got here, we began when historic times started. We settled from over there south of the south part of Wyoming, all along the front range of the Rocky Mountains, all the way down through Colorado, all the way down towards Pueblo. Nowadays, where that's at. And then we would go out into the plains, out into South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, which is the panhandle of Texas and Oklahoma. All that area was where we operated, you might say. And when we was there, we like I said, they were That was before historic times. Then people began to come. Lewis and Clark didn't find us. Lewis and Clark, they found the Cheyennes. Um, they found a tribe that they called I think it was called the Kananovich, which translates to buffalo people, buffalo path people. So they said, well, that could have been us. But I think what they found is they found the Grovons. So then they began, later on, as the trappers began to come in because this was good trapping coming. The fur company started to come in from Canada, from the United States. They started coming to trap. This is where they start to run into these that they call the Falls people, and these were the Grovons. Well, the Grovons and the Arapahos are the same people. There were 5 subdivisions of the tribes of the Arapahos, and only 2 exist today. That's the Grovons and the Arapaho proper, which is Arapahos and Grovons. So when they finally came and they began to trap and trade with us, then they began to find out who we were. The term Arapaho, they say in the history books, it wasn't used until 1810. That's when they first found and started to call us Arapaho. Arapaho is kind of a word from the Crow, they say, that means tattooed people, because we used to tattoo ourselves across our chests with circles in blue. We use that. But anyway, that's what they call us. So today, the Northern Arapahos, they tap themselves like right here. They used to be because of the tattoos, but now it's because they call themselves the mother tribe. They have a good heart. The Southern Arapahos used to point at the part in their hair, and because we used to put that red paint in the part in our hair, and what was we created from? So we was pointing at that paint. But what does the other tribe see us do? Point along the edge of our nose, and what do they start calling us? The dirty nose Indians and all that. When no, we was pointing at that part in our hair where we put that red paint. That's where we come from. That's us. So that's the science. But that's what they used to call us. And I think there's another one that they call us Arapaho. Close to that, that meant trader, because we used to go among the tribes and trade. And they said that we were early arrivers on the plains, that we got here maybe 1,000 years before the other tribes began to come in. But of course, there was tribes here already in Colorado. The Crows were here. The Kiowas were here. The Comanches were further down south. The Comanches broke off from the Utes. The Utes were in the mountains. They were here before we got here. But what we did is we took and we began, us and the Grovons, and whether you believe it or not, the Plains Apaches used to be with us. They're here in the front range of the Rockies. And then in the 1700s, probably, that's when we found the Cheyennes in the Black Hills. And we began, I don't know what happened or what caused that tie together. But ever since we met from that point on, we became allies. So the Cheyennes, the Arapahos, the Grovons, the Plains Apache, we controlled the front range of Colorado, the front range of the Rockies. We controlled the eastern plains into South Dakota, Nebraska. We had the enemies, of course. The Utes was our hereditary enemies. They lived in the mountains. Of course, the Crow were to the north, Pawnees to the east, the Kiowas and Comanches were to the south. But together we held this land. And that's where the white people, the settlers, as they began to pass through on their way to California, there was a gold strike out there in 49. They began to cross. That's when they ran into us there in the plains, the central plains of Colorado. 1825, there was a paddle boat that came up the Missouri. It had smallpox. Two guys were sick with smallpox. The Grovons caught it, and it almost wiped them out. They were dying, and they said they were decimated till they were almost completely gone, and then they went to Montana. They said to survive, we have to get away from the white people because they're the ones that has this disease. If we get away from them, then we'll be okay. So they went to the Milk River up in Montana. They didn't know that they took that disease with them. So they continued. The plague continued to kill them off until finally they built up an immune system enough that they could make it. Now, so they were gone after 1825. The Arapahos and the Apache and the Cheyennes still were there. We survived that smallpox somehow. And so this is the way it was. And then in 50, and then you remember the trappers came in and then we began to be with them and everything like this. And then in 59 is when gold was discovered in Colorado. But before that, you remember I was talking about how they were crossing through our property and our land, these settlers. Well, the government said, well, we have to make a treaty with them to make them leave the ones that are passing through alone. So the 1851 treaty was made, and that included, the tribes of the plains. They all came to Fort Laramie, up there in Wyoming. The Arapahos came, the Cheyennes came, the Crows, some of the Sioux tribes came. They all came. And what that treaty said was, you live, and they outlined our treaty. If you look at the 1851 treaty, it basically covers the area that I'm telling you that we operated in. So to us, it was okay. We didn't really understand it, but they said, you're going to own this land. We didn't understand owning land. We didn't understand that. The land took care of us. It was, our mother, the earth. She provided for us. She took care of us. We could not own her, for she cared for us. Nobody could own it. But this is what they were telling us, and we couldn't believe this. And so this is where they told us to stay, and they told us we have to leave these settlers going through alone. We have to let them pass through. And we said, wow, but then what was the settlers doing? They were not supposed to stay. They were supposed to just pass through. They were supposed to leave the game alone. They were supposed to just subside and go through. Instead, they began killing all the game. They began to settle in different places. 1859, they discovered gold in Colorado. Naturally, they become another land rush of settlers to Colorado. And again, the tribes began to say, You can't stay here. And the main one that was talking, you remember Chief Left-Hand. He lived right there in Boulder. But his older sister was married to John Purcell, who worked for Bent in St. Vrain. He taught Chief Left-Hand, his brother, and his younger brothers and nephews how to speak English. Snake Woman, he married Snake Woman, John Purcell. She understood English. Her daughters began to learn, and her children began to learn English. So when they signed this 1851 treaty, Left-Hand was there. Left-Hand understood what they said, and it said they can pass through. You can't stay here. So the famous story there at Boulder in 58, when the first ones came through, Left-Hand went over there and told them, you can't stay here. He wasn't being mean or anything. He was being factual because he understood that treaty. You can't stay here is what he said. Rapos being who they are, the other chiefs came to him and said, look, if we don't take care of them, they will perish. They will not last the winter out. So Left-Hand said, okay, you can stay, but springtime, when it gets better, you have to go on. And so they provided for these people, helped them to make it through the winter. Then next year, 59, they discovered gold. They never left. So they're coming in, and all these towns began to come up, and the Rapos began to see all this. 1861, when Left-Hand took his warriors and went across to fight the Utes, the people in Boulder were getting drunk, everything, and they all went out to the camp and they raped all the women. When Left-Hand came back, seeing what they'd done, he packed up his people and he left. Little Raven over there, Cherry Creek, packed up and he left. So then they signed a treaty with us, 1861, down there at Bent's Fort, southeast Colorado. And they said, this will be your new territory. This will be your new reservation. You have to stay on it. But there's always a stipulation in our treaties that said that we could always go and hunt buffalo where we could find them in large numbers. So the thing, keep in mind, is that we never did stay on any of the reservations that they told us that we had. We didn't understand this land, own this land. You got to remember that. We didn't understand that. So 61, they moved us to southeast Colorado. And Margaret Cole wrote in her book and said that after 1861, the Arapahos never came back to the Denver area as a tribe. So after 61, they had to get rid of us because we still could go back and say, wait a minute, we still own that land that you're sitting on. You have to move. They knew that the federal government could make them move if we pushed it. We could still say we own that land. And so there was a territorial governor by the name of John Evans. And he had a military leader by the name of John Shivington. And so they figured out they were politically ambitious. So they said, if we can have a great victory, then that'll help our accolades and we'll be able to be elected to Congress. And, they had these big ambitions of being political strongholds. Plus, they wanted Colorado to be a state. They wanted statehood. If you look, 61, they tried. to get their first shot at tri-statehood. They were turned down. So they were working on this come 64. And if you study the year of 64, it begins to study. You will then take the events that ended up at Sand Creek. They started out by creating this false story of that there is an uprising. That was the story. All the tribes are coming together and they're going to kill all the white people and run them out. So we need militias. We need to create our own militias to protect us. And they came. That was the song they were singing. And they were telling everybody by the newspapers and everything. They built Fort Chambers because it was a place for the people to come when that uprising came. They even tell a story one time there was dust coming from a cattle drive. Everybody ran to Fort Chambers and spent the night because this story was believed. Hang on to that thought. It was believed that there was an uprising. Finally, Shevington and Evans got their wish. They could form their militia for 90 days. For 100 days, right? 100 days. They could have this for their security of Boulder Valley. They trained at Fort Chambers, which is in Valmont. And the first, they used to call them the Bloodless Third because they didn't have nobody to fight. The first blood they drew was when they sent Captain Nichols and a group went to Sterling. And there was a small uh, gathering of Cheyennes that was going by. And so they went out and they massacred that whole small camp of Cheyennes. That was their first blood. And then they went back to Fort Chambers. In the meanwhile, the tribes, the chiefs, Black Kettle of the Cheyennes, White Antelope of the Cheyennes, Chief Left Hand, they said, we want to make peace. And so they went to Bent's Fort. Now you got to remember that there was two proclamations by Governor Evans. The first one said, if you are a tame Indian, you will go to the forts, you will turn in your arms, and you will live at the forts, and they will take care of you. That way we can separate you from the hostiles. Everybody else that don't do that is a hostile. So he began to separate the Indians in that manner, to describe them. Then later on, because they wouldn't meet with him, he had a second proclamation that told the white settlers, you can kill any Indian anywhere that you see them, and your reward for killing them is their property. So then we became hunted all over Colorado. So with this in mind, the chiefs had, what was his name? Bent, one of the Bent boys. They wrote a letter and they said, we'll take it to Fort Lyons over there. Major Wynkoop was there. We'll give it to him, showing that we really want to have peace. And they even went and ransomed some white captives from their other tribal members and brought them down as to show good faith. So this letter, they knew Left Hand took a small bunch of warriors and tried to ride to Fort Lyons to talk to them. They were fired upon and they had to run. This is the atmosphere that was going on. There was an old man by the name of One Eye, old Cheyenne man. Him and his wife said, we will take this letter to Major Wynkoop, even if it means our death. We will take it to him. And it said that they wanted to meet and they wanted to show about these captives and stuff. That old man took it. And this was the first time that the military looked and seen the Indians as a man, a human with feelings and everything. He was a savage before that. Something clicked in Wynkoop when he saw this old man risk his life to come with that letter. He was said, I will meet with the chiefs. So the meeting was set up at the Smoky Hills River, which is if you go over to Scott City, Kansas, and go north, that was the area where this meeting was to take place. Of course, the chiefs moved about 15 miles from the camp because they didn't want the soldiers to see them where the camp was. But they met with him and they talked to Wynkoop. And again, something different happened to him. He's seen the Indians that they really cared for their people, that they were humans, that they wanted to do something good. So this is what they were talking about. So he took them real fast. He took them to Denver. They met with Shivington and Evans, which is called the camp at Camp Weld. It's called the Camp Weld Accords. You can read them and to see what they all ask them. Not one time did they tell them they could have peace. They told them, you go back and you camp at Sand Creek. Because now they knew who was there. Old men, old women, and children. They knew where they were going to camp. So soon as they left, Shevington got his 100 days and started down. Every camp where he went, he picketed so nobody could get out to tell him what he was going to do. He went all the way to Camp Lyons. He held Camp Lyons in a picket. Nobody could go in or out of there. And then November 29th, he attacked. The Indians could hear him coming. He seen them drop their gear and everything. It wasn't a surprise attack. They were told to be there. They were considered prisoners of war. They were even given rations to hold them there. So they didn't run. They just stood out while they came. And then they opened fire with the artillery. Artillery ripping through their hide teepees. Killing indiscriminately the women and children. The women cut the back open of their teepees and told their children to run. Run! And they began to run up the banks. The Arapahos were camped east of the Cheyenne. So the Cheyennes had plenty of time. Well, they had more time as they watched the the Arapahos get wiped out, get slaughtered. And then they came on for them. This gave them time to put up their flag of truce and their American flag that they were told to fly to show that they were a peaceful village. They too were indiscriminately killed, slaughtered. The battle, they said, only took a short time. And then the people began to run. And the stories go that as they ran, they began to dig pits underneath the banks of the. And there's a story. Her name was in English it means in medicine way. Chabina. She ran. She was 8 years old. She ran with her brother, who was 6 years old, and a man pulled him into one of them banks. They don't know whether he was a Cheyenne man, but they think he was. But he was wounded. And they lay there for 2 days. You remember, the first day is when they killed everybody. The second day is when they began to take all their war trophies, mutilate the bodies, everything like this. This after the second day, then they left. Then the people began to come out of the pits and begin to run. There's many stories like that. Those two actually were picked up by Pueblos. They were taken all the way to New Mexico and then finally brought back into the panhandle of Oklahoma where they knew the Arapahos would be. There's other stories like that, but that's the story of Sand Creek. 1864, they have another treaty at the signing of the Little Arkansas, which is basically north of Wichita, Kansas. This told the Cheyenne Arapahos that you're going to now live out of Colorado in Kansas. Kansas did not want us. So that treaty did not go through. So in 1867, they had another treaty at Medicine Lodge, Kansas. In that treaty, there were 5 tribes that signed that treaty, but it took 2 days to do it. The reason why they first got there, the first day, the Kiowas, the Comanches, they signed their treaty. Now, I always told you about the Apaches. The Apaches in 61 said we want to be attached to the Arapahos. So they signed the 61 treaty with us. In 67, they signed saying we want to go with the Kiowas and the Comanches. That's why they became partly known as the Kiowa Apaches. But they were known as the KCAs, Kiowa, Comanches, and Apaches. So they signed the treaty the first day, and they started on their trip to Oklahoma. The tribes had heard of a story of a little boy that was 1 year old who was captured at Sand Creek, put in a camp stove, and taken back to Boulder. Now, Shivington said, we will take no prisoners, but they snuck this little boy. And this little boy he was sold to a traveling, these carnivals. He was sold to one of those. The chiefs heard about this, and he was advertised as the savage son of Chief Black Kettle. Well, the chiefs heard about this, and they said, we're not going to sign this treaty until you get this boy back. The army actually performed a snatch and grab from that carnival, brought that little boy back to Medicine Lodge. And when he started speaking, he was speaking Arapaho. So he was given back to the Arapahos. Then 2 days after the KCA signed, the Cheyenne Arapahos signed their treaty. And that moved us into Oklahoma. When we moved into Oklahoma, we tried to settle at Fort Supply because the closest buffalo that we could find to hunt that in any large numbers was still in the panhandle of Oklahoma and the panhandle of Texas, going towards which would be Fisher Peak, around that area. There was still buffalo there. So we went there in 67. Again, we still had not lived on a reservation. We wanted to stay at Fort Supply. They told us you can't stay at Fort Supply. It's part of the Cherokee Outlet. So then we moved to Cantonment, which is near the town of Canton, Oklahoma. So from then on, that's where we began to stay. In 74, Quanah Parker said, the last battle on the plains was this right here. Quanah Parker said, we must get rid of the buffalo hunters up there in the panhandle. They're killing all the buffalo. That's all we have left. So he carried a war pipe to the Kiowas. They said yes. He carried a pipe to the Apaches. Some of them said yes. Then he went to the Cheyennes. They said yes. The Arapahos, the big chief said, no, we will not do it. But 14 Arapahos went down there and joined them. This was the second battle of Adobe Walls. That was the last battle. And then again, they spread out into Kansas and then came back. In 1875, when they came back, the government said, you will be punished for what you did. We will take the troublemakers and send them to Fort Marion in Augustine, Florida. That was where the troublemakers went. There was 13 Cheyenne, 2 Arapahos. The 2 Arapahos that were sent got in trouble for doing stuff against the employees there at Darlington. Not not the war. They were never punished. Okay, what's so that's how we got. And the bad thing about it is that Captain Pratt was there. Captain Pratt got the ideal. He worked with the tribes, and they did so well there. He took that ideal to the government and said, "I can now tell you how I can make these Indians white people. We can save the man, kill the Indian." Boarding schools started there. I think I'm out of time. So anyway, that's how we got to Oklahoma. There's much more. That is real fast, but I think if Eric wants, I think we can see if anybody has any questions.
Sure. Yeah, I just that thank you, Fred, for sharing all of that history with us. I wanted to, yeah, I wanted to check in with folks on questions. Otherwise we can keep sharing history. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. But Fred, if you'd like to continue, um,
Okay.
go ahead.
So I was saying, and that was the beginning. From St. Augustine, he went to the government and said, I can do this. I can make them white. So he created Carlisle. And you know the story there that the tribes, I mean, the churches began to recruit from all the tribes and send them to Carlisle. And again, they were, you know, kill the man, save the Indian. I mean, kill the Indian, save the man. Let me say it right. Anyway, that's what happened. And so they would come back with their hair cut short, dressed in white man's clothes, and they were educated. A lot of our people went there. A lot of them didn't come back. And so we were there and we had to go through these. And it wasn't by choice. They were telling the chiefs, you send me your children or you don't get no rations. You send me your children or you're not going to get this help from the government. So rather than starve his people to death because the buffalo were now gone, the only thing they could to sustain their life was what the government was giving to them in rations. So they had no choice. They sent their people. And these boarding schools brought this pain and anguish back to the tribes. But we continued to try to function there. Then when we began to settle, like we said, we settled at Cantonment. Cantonment was a place that was created. It was halfway between Fort Supply and Fort Reno. And the Army would put supplies there. We remember that that's where we settled there. And so while we was there, the missionaries started to show up, and the Mennonites showed up there at Cantonment. This is where my people come from. They're at Cantonment. And so the government said, you can create the schools. Since you're there, you can create the schools that's going to teach them there. So we had a Mennonite school there at Cantonment. Now you got to remember, let me go real fast. There was the tribes, because we continued the same way we did before. They put us all together at Cantonment, but however, the chiefs would take their people and camp away because of the amount of horses, the amount of grass we needed, and it was easier to take care of small groups than it was big groups. But we would still come together at our ceremonies, but they were beginning to outlaw our ceremonies too. So this is all the conflict that was going on. Little Raven camped at Cantonment. His band was known as the Wachaethe, Ugly Faces. That's why I was born into that clan. I am part of that Little Ravens clan. Then on down the way, there was like Left Hand, the young Left Hand. not the one that died at Sand Creek. Yeah, he died there. There was a younger man named, and he was left-handed. He settled down by Geary. Um, Powderface camped over by Calumet. There was another band, Otos, was over here at Lumpmouse, southwest of Geary. So the tribes camped. That was the Rapos. The Cheyennes camped also, but they moved further west. The Cheyennes did. And so as we began to camp, they began to come in and they began to teach us this religion. And we would say what we know when they start talking to us about Jesus. We told them, we know this man, but we know him as Shishibahinen, man above, because he came and he was born in a mysterious way. He killed all these sins and then he rose back up into the sky, just the same way that the story goes in the Bible. And so as we began to, but we would call him our Father, we began to go to church, and some of them began, and then they began to know that there was three, because the peyote movement came in, and then the church movement come in, and then there was those that continued to practice the old traditional Arapaho ways. So you were known either as a traditionalist, a peyote man, or a Christian. The Christians began to accept the way of the church, and we began to put our own words into these church songs. We began to make our own church hymns. Over here, east of Geary, there was a place called Swap It Back. And if you look at the book by Virginia Trehome, there is in there, in the beginning, words of an Indian song that's English. May Birdshead, who she's talking to, that's riding with her, sang that song to her. And it was all Arapaho words. And it goes, Ne ta e na u he wa da tha e a hu sa te ku na ha na ba ti ho ne ta he sa na ni a hu sa te ku na hana bati huneta he sanandini. And these words, you read that book, my people come to this road, for it's a good place where our Father is. And so we accepted the way of the church and began to sing these songs like that. The ghost dance movement came. Now why did the ghost movement come so powerful to the Rapos? You got to remember, they were trying to make farmers out of us. We did not know how to farm. We were on rough land in Oklahoma. It's hard to farm here. And it was just like a ending battle to. And so when this word came to us that we could do this dance that would bring back the old way, that would bring back the animals, bring back the buffalo, the deer, everything we ate would all come back. The white people would be pushed back east, away from us, go back across the water where they came from. This was the teachings from Wovoka. And we thought, you got to remember we were starving to death. We were dying from diseases. We were living and just wherever we could put up our teepees, and our teepees, we didn't have buffalo hides no more. We had to use canvas to build teepees nowadays. We were in bad shape. So we took this and we began to dance this ghost dance. and we was praying and hoping. Meanwhile, the Dawes Act came. The Dawes Act stated that we had too much land again, so we were going to get one little section of land, 160 acres. All the rest would be put out there on a land run. And again, you think they can negotiate this. Yes. Have you ever negotiated with the government? That's the same thing that happened to us. They were telling the chiefs, you can come and talk to us. The chiefs came, and Left Hand, who was the main chief, Little Raven died in 1890. After that, Left Hand took over. He went to Sitting Bull, who was running the ghost dance, and he asked him, what should I do? He told him, go ahead and sell the land, but sell it for as much money as you can get because we're going to dance and they're going to disappear anyway. This is how strong we believed in that ghost dance. So they went over there and they done just that. So we lost all our reservation in western Oklahoma. We all got 160 acres, and the land runs began 1889. The land runs began 1890. The land runs, and so now we're living on little patches of land. They're still trying to get us to farm it. We can't farm it. We began to be losing our property. The bankers would come and tell us, buy your farm equipment, and then you can pay me back with your crops. Well, when the crops failed, they took the land. Finally, they passed a law stating that they couldn't do that to us. But by that time, we had lost maybe 3/4 of our land. This is what we had in Oklahoma. So now we have 8 counties that we call our service area, and it's the boundaries of our old reservation of where we live, and we provide for our people through government grants and the casinos and whatever economic development we can do here in Oklahoma. Do anybody have any more questions or anything? That's real quick. There's a whole bunch of what's going on during this time, but that's basically what happened and how we got here.
Thank you, Fred. Yeah. Um, and thanks for sharing the it's a deep history and a hard history and a history of resilience, and we really appreciate your sharing it with us for our benefit. Um, we're we're a little bit close to our time. I feel like we could do like a part two and um do more of the history. Let me just try to get to a couple questions. Um, One is how did you how did your knowledge of the history come about? How did you get interested in that? And have you written a book? Have you written your knowledge down?
No, I come from an old family who passed these myths that I was telling you. They came from stories from my grandmother, my uncle, and my mother. My grandmother was born in 1888 there at Cantonment, and she lived her whole life there. She went to school there. She became an orphan at 13, but she knew the old way, and she taught me that way, and she told us the stories. She told us in the wintertime, it's a time when nothing can go on because, remember the horses are weak. Everything, you had to prepare your food to keep you going through the winter. Well, everybody was in the camps then, and them old ladies, old men would tell the stories, and they would tell all these different stories. We even have stories that go along, kind of like Aesop fables. This happened to cause this happened. This is the reason why this happened. This is the reason why things are like that. We have stories like that. But that's where I began to learn the history of the tribes and where we came from, what we were. You know, we're here with the Cheyennes. We've been with the Cheyennes since probably 1700s or so, but we are two different people, two different tribes. We speak two different languages. Our ways are different, and we can't do things together. We can only do them. You either do it Arapaho or you do it Cheyenne. There's no crossing them. We have two different sun dances, two different sweat lodges. Everything like this is different. Our language is different. So, the stories I'm telling you are from the Arapaho side. And this is the stories that I was told growing up. That, when you go to school, I went to a public school in Canada for 12 years. I went there. The Concho was still going on boarding school, but my mother was a product of that boarding school. And she would always tell us, "You're not going there. Too much pain there. They treat you mean there. I'm going to take care of you over here." So we went 12 years in a public school just because of what the boarding school done to her. So that's how I learned.
We had someone asked a historical question, which is what is the history of the horse with the Arapaho people?
Now, if you talk to certain older men, some of those in Wyoming have started to tell the story that we've always had horses. Even before these big horses came in that the Spanish brought, we had the smaller horses that look like, them. Yeah, the only thing I can equate that close to would be them Mongolian steppe horses. They were the small horses like that. They said that we had horses like that, but sometimes the stories that we have, we are walking, you know, but we got the horses early because we were able to steal them from the Utes. So we had horses very, very early. And we also traded with the Comanches once they left the Utes. So we got horses early. But that's the story. But the old stories that they used to tell was that when we walked, we had dogs that carried our properties and our helped the women move the camps. But you got to think about, well, what kind of dogs were they? Well, they were wolves. So you know how big wolves are, because they said these animals could carry like 60 pounds of camp gear. So that's what we used to do. But yes, I believe that we were walking for quite a while when we came here, but we
Mm.
did died out or something.
So this is kind of an amalgamation of some questions that I've seen
Uh-huh.
when when non so actually let me ask you one question before that. And folks, to our audience, we're gonna, if it's okay with you, Fred, we'll go just a little bit over our time. Um and we are recording so that if anyone has to go, they can um catch the recording. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about um, the some of the work that you're doing now
Mhm.
to preserve Arapaho language and history and culture. I know that you're working on, I think I read about a buffalo project in the Boulder area and um maybe a cultural embassy in Denver. I know there are Arapaho language classes. Would you mind talking a little bit about some of the work that you do?
Well, I was hard and putting in the language and culture program. It was called Culture and Heritage at the beginning, and then they brought the language into it, because you can't teach culture without language. You can't have language without culture. They go hand in hand. And so what we have now is a program in which that we have speakers from Oklahoma that are working with the fluent speakers in Wyoming so that they can keep this language alive. And that's what they do, is they correspond with them daily, and to learn this language so that we can keep it alive. And so I work with that, and I have taught it, the language, in the school system and then in the public in our community. But the thing is that I also want to teach the culture part of it too, the ceremonies, the things that are Arapaho. I want to teach that also. So I do that, and in our travels as the NAGPRA representatives, we began to repatriate our loved ones who were our ancestors, who were, dug up, or for a number of reasons, we're putting museums on display, such as this. Well, the law now says they have to give them back to us so that we can bury them. So through working through that, I began to travel, and then I began to travel to Colorado, because Colorado is still our home. We still have ties to Colorado. People don't realize that we go there. We go there for our ceremonial medicines and things, because they grow in the mountains, and we go there to get them. The northern Rapos, for a long time, we've had to depend on the northern Rapos because they live in the mountains to give us medicines that we use. And so we were glad that when Colorado opened their doors, because of that one incident, in which I can't think of his name now. I remember he was killed by the police, and things became a lot open for us then. And they began to ask us, and we began to come to Boulder, and we began to talk to Boulder, and then people began to ask us and talk to us in different places. Boulder County said one time, it was kind of a strange deal, where we said, you should have buffalo instead of these cattle grazing. Buffalo will help you to bring the land back to the way it was. And they said, well, where we get buffalo? Well, we have buffalo. So we began working on this project, and we were getting close, so that we're going to bring buffalo and put them there in Boulder County. And it'll be a co-stewardship of the Cheyenne Rapos and Boulder County, taking care of those buffaloes there. So that's one thing that we did. Again, Richard Williams, who is, a great man, he got us some money, and so we're looking for some land. And one of the ideals we came up with one time was, what if we had an embassy in Denver? Because Denver has more government offices than any other place except for Washington, D.C. So it's the best place to put an embassy for the Indians that could talk. They would be close to the government. They could come together and work together. So this was a great ideal that he came up with. We worked with me and my partner, who's on the Cheyenne side, Chester Whiteman, my Cheyenne brother. We worked very hard on getting Mount Evans named Mount Blue Sky. And then we've also helped to name some other places that are in the Boulder Valley. I've been to Estes Park down there at the park in the middle of town. I named the Arapaho woman her baby, and put the inscription on there. That's a Arapaho saying, down there in Boulder Park. I mean, down there in Estes Park. So if
Okay.
you get a chance, go down there and look at that, and you'll see a Arapaho woman and her baby there.
Thanks, Fred. Let me ask let me ask one more question. That's again kind of built from the questions people put in the chat. When when non-native people ask you, what can I do to live in better relationship to native peoples? Or, what can I do to address harm that's been done? What what do you say to them?
I always say, take time to know us. Don't think of us as, what Hollywood has put out or books have put out. Listen to us and let us talk to you, man to man or woman to man, whatever it may be. Let us talk to you, and you will see who we are and what we can do together. Because we don't want to come back and say, well, you're sitting on our land, get out. We don't want that. We want to come back and be part of Colorado because it's still our home. We want to become part of it because it still calls us. It still takes care of us. Our mother takes care of us there. And so I always tell them, listen to us and learn who we are. And we will listen to you and learn who you are. This way we can walk together so we can make this place better.
Thank you, Fred. And I want to thank you again for your generosity in sharing for for our benefit. We really appreciate it. And we hope to welcome you back to Estes Park sometime soon. Well, we hope you'll come and we hope we get a chance for you to come and see us again soon and to
I
welcome you
enjoy it.
here.
I enjoy coming to Estes Park. It's a very beautiful place. And before I go, I want to say that the Arapaho language has no goodbye to it. We don't say goodbye because we don't have that. Because we always think we're going to see each other again. So we have a word. Hatchet henana bethan. I'm going to see you again. So that's what I want to leave you all with. Hatchet henana bethan. I'm going to see you again. Hey?
We'll see you again, Fred. Thank you. Thank you so much. And have a good, everyone out there, have a good evening as well. Good night, everyone.